Hey friends, it's July the 9th. We are taking a look at Psalm 105 today, and I hope that you enjoyed reading this. I realize that many of you joined us after the Exodus and the whole story of God's people being enslaved and all of that. I realize that. But most of us are familiar with the gist of the story. I love reading. Chronicles has many accounts. Psalms has many accounts of just everything that happened. And it's kind of like the Reader's Digest version of everything that happened. And I love that I have read the Bible and studied the Bible enough to be familiar with some of the ins and outs of that great story of God's people. And I hope that you enjoyed kind of walking down memory lane there in Psalm 105. Every now and then you come across something in Scripture that it just triggers something. And that's what happened when I looked down and just the blurb of the mention of Joseph's name. Let's look at just that whole writing of starting down in verse 16. He called for a famine on the land of Canaan, cutting off its food supply. Then he sent someone to Egypt ahead of them. I love that he called for something to happen, and in advance, he sent someone for that problem. There's so much there for us, but it's not the message for today. But please know that long before whatever's going on in your life started happening, before your life went off the rail a little bit, regardless of whether it's your doings or someone else, you're feeling the effects of someone else's decision. God knew all about the off the rail time, and there is a solution in place. Long before Abraham ever climbed the Mount Moriah with Joseph, God had planned for the sacrifice to be coming up the other side of the mountain. Nothing catches him by surprise. So please, I wish I could say more about that, but that's not where our message is today. But let's just chew on that for a little bit. Maybe you can rewind and take some notes down on that. Joseph, who was sold as a slave, they bruised his feet with fetters and placed his neck in an iron collar. Until the time came to fulfill his dreams, the Lord tested Joseph's character. Now, when we were back reading the story of Joseph, those of us who've been with Read Through the Word since January, and again, if you haven't, don't feel like you're going to miss out on this lesson, because chances are you are familiar with the story of Joseph, his brothers. He had 12 brothers, and these are the tribes of Israel, and he had these dreams of him being in leadership and his brothers bowing to him in some rather graphic and very colorful dreams. His father adored him and gave him and none of the other sons this colorful coat. They were jealous of him. They called him Dreamer. He was a little punky. He was a little snotty. You know, Dad sent him out to kind of check up on the brothers and report back. I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't sit well with older siblings, right? So I don't want to paint a perfect picture of Joseph because he had his flaws, but he didn't deserve to be sold into slavery, and he was. And his death was very tragic, or his quote-unquote death was very tragic to his dad, Jacob, and took years away from his life, really, in the mourning of a death of a son that never actually happened. The famine hit. Joseph, being sold into slavery, I'm just kind of fast forwarding this, had worked his way up to be basically vice president. There's a lot happened in between there. But his dreams eventually came true. But in reading the story and all of the things that happened with Miss Potiphar and being stuck in jail and the baker and the cupbearer getting out of prison before he did. I mean, all of these things, being sold into slavery by his brothers, being put up on the auction block, all of these humiliating things were put into place and were purposed by God. Scripture says to test what? To test Joseph's what? Character. Really? Okay, so does that sound harsh of God? Yeah, it kind of does. I'm just going to be honest with you. It does kind of sound a little bit harsh. I mean, seriously. You're going to test this man's character? Yeah. And the ways that, the things that happened to him were very, very severe. But it was all purposed and planned and anointed by God for a greater purpose, the salvation of his people, the 12 tribes, whom would one day inherit the promised land. So it's real easy for us to kind of shake our finger at God and, or maybe even turn our nose up and go, God, I can't believe he did that. Roll our eyes, give God a, an eye roll. And part of me wants to do that when I feel myself going through testing. There are dreams that he's put in my heart that have come true, that have, I don't want to say came true like he's a genie, have been fulfilled. I think that sounds kind of godlier and more spiritual, fulfilled. But along the way, I was tested. And I know I was tested by God. Hindsight shows me I was tested by God. Let's be honest. Joseph wasn't ready to be king at the age of 17 when he was sold into slavery. He was a spoiled brat. His character had to be honed to match the calling that God put on his life. And God found him worthy of that. So when we think of it in that way, we have to just go, wow, God is so graceful that he cares enough about us to prepare us for what he has called for us and called us to. So I want us to there's a couple things that we need to know. Not every misfortune and injustice and trouble comes from Satan. We're so quick to give Satan the credit for any bad thing that happens. Yes, he has minions. Yes, he has his quote-unquote angels. Yes, they observe our behavior and set up schemes and plans for us. Those principalities are spiritual. Read Ephesians 6. They are there. Satan has a design for our life, just like God has a plan for our life. He can't read God's mind. He doesn't know what God's plan is for our life, but he makes his decisions about our life based on our decisions. He watches the patterns of our life. But not every misfortune and trouble, we cannot say that it's all Satan. Sometimes misfortune, injustices, and troubles are ordained by God to help prepare us for the place God has prepared for us. So until then, notice Scripture says until the time came to fulfill his dreams, the Lord tested Joseph's character. Until then, until that time comes, we may have to serve somewhere and someone we don't want to serve. We may have to endure sufferings we don't want and did not ask for. Charles Spurgeon said this: the iron fetters were preparing him to wear chains of gold and making his feet ready to stand on high places. It's even so with the Lord's afflicted ones. They too shall one day step from their prisons to their thrones. One day, ultimately one day, everything we've endured, we're going to step from this plateau to the place in heaven where he has set us a seat at his table ready. But on earth, there are places that he has for us and prepared for us. And sometimes we may have to go through some affliction. But rest assured that he is in control of everything. And he's preparing us for the next stage. And until then, here's some great verses for you. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect, needing nothing. We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know they help us develop endurance. This is a repeat. That was James, right? That was James. This is Romans. And endurance develops strength of character, exactly what Joseph went through. And character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And endurance develops the strength of character. Well, there it is. I put that in there twice. And the character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. I repeated that verse, I think, instead of putting all of them in there. Sorry about that. I guess we needed to know that twice. But until then, until that happens, serve God faithfully wherever he has you. Instead of complaining about it, make it a great place of service, of joy, even in these hard trials. Not necessarily joyful in what you're doing, because that might not be really joyful, but joy in God that he is preparing you for something, and he's called you to this for some reason that is even greater than you even know. See you next time on Read Through the Word.